Prime Minister Scott Morrison is doing his best to show that his national cabinet is working. But for all the gloss he puts on it, it's plainly that each state is each state for itself, and the PM's role is merely to announce what they're prepared to do. It was always going to be like this, in a gathering of 9 separate governments, each with their own areas of responsibility, given that's how our federation was set up. And wishing it was otherwise might make us all feel good, but it denies constitutional reality. Now, to his credit, the PM has always done his best to discourage pandemic panic and to remind the premiers that governments have a responsibility for livelihoods as well as lives. It's not much good aiming to save every last individual if people are left surviving in an economic wasteland. The aim of today's meeting was to get more Australians home. We know there's around 25,000 Australians overseas who say they want to come home, but they can't because the states have put limits on how many people can enter quarantine at any time. To date, let's not forget, almost 400,000 Australians have returned home since the 13th of March. Yesterday, the PM unilaterally announced that the caps on international arrivals would be lifted from 4,000 to 6,000 a week. He foxed out the states who say they demand people are allowed to come home but won't do anything to help it happen. And expect, of course, as we saw in Queensland, that the Commonwealth pays the bill. Today, out of National Cabinet, New South Wales, already doing the heavy lifting, well, it's agreed to do more. In fact, it's worth noting, throughout this pandemic, New South Wales has taken as many as 2,500 people a week, Queensland around 500. Yet over 40% of the people that New South Wales takes in via Sydney into hotel quarantine, 40% are residents of other states that are not pulling their weight. Queensland and WA, always difficult, have this afternoon agreed to take more, but not for several weeks. Throw in some one-off charter flights to smaller states, and the PM will probably be able to say that he's met his 6,000 a week international arrival target fairly soon. It'll be a victory of sorts. But there are 2 massive issues here. The first is that states insist on running quarantine, but then want the Commonwealth to pay for it. The second is the painfully slow rate of learning to live with a virus that's clearly not as dangerous, to the vast bulk of Australians, of course, as we first thought it was. In Europe, infection numbers have risen sharply again, but not the deaths, which is why there are no new lockdowns. Here, we're still largely locked into a policy response that was devised back in March. Now, every major airport has several empty hotels nearby. Places like Cairns and Townsville are massive tourist centres with almost no one staying there. CBD hotels right around Australia, as we know, are almost deserted. If we stopped quarantining Australians, merely trying to move around their own country, excluding Victorians, of course, for the time being, then we would have more than enough resources to get all those 25,000 Aussies overseas back home. The PM's hope today is to get everyone home by Christmas. I have to say, really, is that the limit of our ambition? And it's not just getting returning Australians home anymore. What about any of us going overseas? If we're prepared to pay for quarantine when we come back, what's the reason to stop us? Given we can't eliminate this virus, given there's no vaccine yet either, sooner or later we're all going to have to accept the reality that, at least for the time being, we have to learn to live with coronavirus. The sooner the states grow up here, the faster, of course, our recovery will be.